Hello and welcome to WestMusings, 10-minute museum talks, sponsored by Wells Fargo, and we're hosted here this evening at the Springs Preserve, and all of the post-production being handled by Soulstream Media. To see more of their work, go to soulstream.net. Our second speaker in this, the second annual series of WestMusings talks, is Michael Wall. Michael is trained as an entomologist. He's a man who knows a lot about bugs. He works in San Diego. We're going to hear very little about his work with bugs, but instead more about his origin story. And I hope that for all of us here, it's something from which we can learn together. Michael, thank you.
Thank you. So about 30 years ago, my brothers and sisters and I got together to make a book for my dad for Father's Day. And we gathered together these like poems and heartfelt stories and stuff like that. And we actually passed them off to my brother to actually hand print them and bind them, because this was 30 years ago and this was before the internet and desktop computers, right? So we did it. We gave it to my dad. He was like choking back tears. You know, it was like we totally nailed it as kids. It was like the perfect thing. But one of the outcomes of that was this beautiful woman that you see here, my mother. I think she was a little bit jealous. And I actually kind of have a hard time saying those words to a crowd of strangers. Normally, I don't put mom and jealous in the same sentence because she's this wonderfully altruistic, strong, demure human being. So why would I accuse her of such things in front of you all? Well, over the course of the 30 years since we did that for my dad, 2 times my mom said, you know what, I'd really like it if you and your siblings would put together your memories of your grandfather's mimosa tree in a book like you did for your dad. And you can see the rage in her face. And I'm joking, right? Because I think she's actually forgotten about it. But when a woman who never asks her children for anything asks for something twice, then you should probably remember it. And I did, and so I decided to do something about it. It's just taken me a really long time to do something about it. So rather than doing exactly what she asked and putting a book together and maybe using Shutterfly or something like that to do this, I had this vision. Nope. I'm going to needle, felt, and knit this 3-dimensional wall hanging of the tree in my grandfather's yard. And then my siblings, we're going to write our memories, and I'm going to applique that all onto the back. And I'm going to do that because I have vast experience in all of these artistic techniques. You laugh! But you're absolutely right, I didn't, okay? In fact, my previous experience of holding 2 wooden things in my hand had more to do with eating Chinese food, and I wasn't even very effective at that. So the very first step was, in fact, to learn how to knit. And for all you knitters out there, you know that a knit is a stitch. And in order to start knitting, you actually first have to get the yarn onto the knitting needle, and that's called casting on. Now, and that's step 0.5. Now, step 0.75 for Michael was this step. Because after watching plenty of YouTube videos where people seem to be invoking some sort of voodoo incantation in order to get the yarn onto their needles in such a way, I was a little bit frustrated, but eventually got to the point where I could cast on. Back to step 1, knitting, okay? And I'm the type of person that as I cruise along, I automatically think I'm gonna be excellent at something. And so as I was knitting along, I started to create this stitch. I didn't create this stitch, I actually made a mistake. But it seemed to be working for me, but in my mind, it was gonna go into the pantheon of knitting. There would be knit, there would be purl, and there would be wall. Okay, you can imagine where the next step's going. Back to the cursing again, okay? Because what happened was my innovative stitch was actually causing me to pick up stitches like nuts, and what was supposed to be a rectangle is now becoming decidedly funnel-shaped. And as I started to take this all apart, my innovative stitch was actually more of a knot. And so I just kind of had to put it all to the side and start all over again. But this time I started off standing on the shoulders of giants, okay, as a scholar, all right? And I went back and I started to look at everything that people had done before, and I did little experiments and I did test swatches. And finally I got to the point, ta-da, there's the background for this project for my mom, okay? But I got to this point, at least it's semi-rectangular. And so as I moved along with this project, which is still yet unfinished, here it is as of today, okay? Hey, all right? As I got to this point, I realized the way that I approached this project was actually similar to my origin story in the museum business. And so what I'm going to talk to you about next is my origin story as Vice President of Research and Public Programs, or Vice President of RAP, as I like to say, at the Natural History Museum. But I encourage you guys to share your origin stories with one another and with your colleagues. It's a great icebreaker, and it will blow your mind the diversity of life experiences that you're surrounded with on a daily basis. So, not unlike all of you, I was born. In this case, I was born next to a banana cream pie. I was raised in a loving home filled with homemade haircuts and homemade birthday cakes. But this was also in an era where we were allowed to run feral through the woods of South Carolina. And we would literally cut bamboo shoots and try to stab one another with them as we reenacted Rambo and Chuck Norris movies in my youth. I survived that with just a few scars. Went on to college, got a degree in botany, taught my way through graduate school, got a master's and PhD, got married, had 2 beautiful children, and was striding confidently towards a future as an undergraduate professor where I was going to be blowing undergraduate students' minds in this Dead Poet Society kind of way. So how did the leather-patched elbows and moon-eyed undergraduate students turn into a gig as a curator of entomology turned Vice President of Research and Public Programs? For me, it was an opportunity. And it was an opportunity that turned serendipity. But there's actually a lot of opportunity to enter into the museum workplace without any experience in the museum workplace. Because no industry is kind of more dependent on volunteers or has entry-level positions where what you got your degree in might not even matter. It might not even matter even if you got a degree. And so what we get are these summer volunteer camp interns who the next summer are offered an assistant teaching position, perhaps in the summer camps, and then a gig opens up at the visitor services desk. The next thing you know, there might be an opening in membership. You need, or perhaps they need a hand with the next exhibit install. And then 4, 5 years down the road from now, you're a senior content developer, director of corporate giving, or God forbid, Vice President of Research and Public Programs. And so we're presented with the contradictory nature of naivety within the museum business. It's a discipline with professionals whose knowledge of the discipline may be restricted to wholly their own experience and may be restricted to wholly their own experience within a single organization, and I'm pointing at myself here. And the downside of that is that unless we, the naive, are cognizant of our own naivety, then we're doomed to reinvent the wheel. And worse yet is that we're doomed to reinvent the wheel and think that it's innovative, okay? And that's time wasted, that's energy wasted on things that could be advancing the field. But we need to dare to be naive, because all of those non-discipline related experiences that you bring in to our museum circle are crazy, next level, bonkers opportunities to reach people in ways in which they've never been reached before, if they're given the opportunity and space to grow. So this is a call to action to all of you here. Do whatever you can to encourage professional development within your organization and within yourself as an individual. Because we're all scholars, and what you do is a discipline. And the naivety that we bring to that discipline is double-edged. And it can create wonderful things, but we can't innovate in a bubble. We have to look outward, we have to collaborate, and together we can see if we can advance this field in positive ways. My origin story starts with this totally ass-kicking mom who taught her kids to be creative and that boys are allowed to sew and knit. Add onto that a little bit of a layer of feral, Lord of the Flies adolescence. I happen to love numbers and science and metrics and all that sort of stuff. And then you layer on a level of empathy that causes me to cry every time I watch the Lego movie. And in the intersection of that, that's where I am. That's my intersection of serendipity. And so we can all be thankful that we have these serendipitous careers within the museum world, but we have to be vigilant in our understanding that the Venn diagrams that brought us here are probably not enough to advance scholarship within the field, and that we need to cherish that naivety that we have, but undergird the weakness that comes along with it by developing ourselves. And that's what I find happening when I come to these conferences. There's plenty of other ways to do it, but I hope that you find that here as well. And I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank WMA for inviting me. Thank you very much.